Hey, welcome back to my channel, I guess. I just want to say before I get started, thank you guys so much for the ridiculous amount of views that last video got. Like, I think it's sitting at like 6,000 right now, which is about 6,000 more people than I thought would watch it, so thank you, just so much. Even that terrible old video I did like a year and a half ago is getting views, which is like crazy to me. Also, thanks for like 123 subscribers. Crazy. I'm not even supposed to be here. I got a lot of really nice comments, people saying, good job, or I agree, which feels great. And a lot of people who didn't agree, which is also feels nice. I just really like talking about this stuff, basically. So, thank you, really. Anyways, let's get into it. There's a point in the very first Yakuza game where, while Kiryu's getting his super sick dragon tattoo touched up, he's being told this story, the legend of the Longmen River. And essentially the story goes like this. You have your lowly, humble koi fish swimming up a river against the current, eventually having to scale this massive waterfall, at the top of which is a point called Longmen. As the story goes, once the koi reaches Longmen, the gods will take notice of its great feats of strength, of its dedication and perseverance, and in return will transform the koi into a dragon, thought to be the apex of the spiritual world. This scene, I would argue, is one of the most important in the entire series, even 20 years and like 10 games on. It solidifies the importance that these characters and the world around them places on these tattoos. Each of the major characters in just about all of these games are defined to some extent by what they wear on their backs, with the tattoo artist in this scene even saying that he etches a person's fate onto their backs when he gives them a tattoo. And to that point, I wanted to talk a bit today about the characters who wear the koi tattoo. In particular, the often very complex relationships they have with Kiryu, the dragon of the series. And who better to start with than your boy, the one and only Akira Nishikiyama. Nishiki is introduced in Yakuza 1 as Kiryu's closest friend since childhood. But right away you can kind of feel something not quite right inside of him. There's this bitterness and anger towards the world that he feels at this point, partially due to the hospitalization and life-threatening illness his younger sister faces, and even a jealousy of Kiryu's relationship with Yumi, another childhood friend of theirs who now has a budding romantic relationship with Kiryu. Reina is also there. At this point, everything is coming up Kiryu. He is making his way up the Dojima family ladder, and may even be appointed patriarch of his own family sometime soon. And of course, for Nishiki, this all gives way to some complicated feelings. He adores Kiryu, he thinks the world of him, and he wants to be next to him through all of the success that he's seeing. But a big part of Nishiki also wants all of this goodwill and power, and especially this recognition that Kiryu's getting for himself. After all, they grew up together, they both come from this same background as orphans, and they understand this loneliness and isolation that they both feel. They both entered this Yakuza world at the same time, and should be on the rise together. What does Kiryu have that's missing in Nishiki, and why does the world not recognize Nishiki for the person he sees himself to be? But inner turmoil aside, the gang is all happy for now. This all goes awry one night when Dojima, the patriarch of their family, kidnaps Yumi, the implication being that he plans to assault her. And without much of a second thought, Nishiki rushes over to the Dojima family office and shoots him dead. Coming onto the scene just moments too late to stop the conflict, Kiryu makes the snap decision to take the fall for Dojima's murder, covering up Nishiki's involvement in the crime so that he can be there for his sister in what may be her final days. The next time we see Nishiki is over 10 years later, now the patriarch of his own family, but having lost his sister, and as such a much darker, more violent and ruthless person, willing to put people in harm's way and even kill to fulfill his own goals. Nishiki has kind of a looming presence over Yakuza 1. He doesn't actually show up that much, but when he does, there's this kind of constant lingering threat and anxiety over the fact that eventually this can only end with Kiryu and him fighting. And it's about halfway through the game, just before the two properly meet again, that we get this scene of Kiryu learning about the legend of Longmen. And in this scene, the tattoo artist Utabori states that Nishiki is about to reach Longmen, But before he can truly be reborn as a dragon, he needs to face one final challenge in the form of Kiryu. I'm skipping past a lot of the literal plot of the game just because I want to focus more on the emotions of the characters, but basically, tensions rise, things happen, and eventually everything comes to a head at the tippy top of the city, the Millennium Tower. After fighting his way through a secret government agency and beating the crap out of Yumi's ex-husband, I don't have time to get into it, don't worry about it, it comes time for the final showdown to settle all of this for good. And of course, Kiryu wins, Nishiki gets sucker punched, or I guess sucker stabbed, by Yumi's terrible ex, and in one final act of true heroism, Nishiki goes out on his own terms, putting an end to all the violence and conflict that he started. It's tragic, and I feel like this one moment kind of haunts Kiryu and the games themselves through pretty much the entire rest of the series. And this is only made more interesting through Yakuza 0, a prequel that heavily features Nishiki, as well as Yakuza Kiwami, a remake of one. Which, say what you want, I don't think it's a particularly great remake, but the one unambiguously positive thing in that game is the kind of expanded look at Nishiki's fall from grace, and a more detailed account of what exactly happened to Nishiki over that decade Kiryu was in prison, and what took him from our chill best buddy to asshole. The original Yakuza 1 takes a much more specific focus on Kiryu's experience, coming off of 10 years in prison and having to now find a new lease on life now that the world has moved on without him. And in that original version of the story, Nishiki is one of many things embodying that change. In Kiwami, these new scenes kind of bring a new focus to Nishiki and offer him this internality that he might not have had in the original. It kind of elevates his story to something almost mythically tragic. I don't necessarily think either version of the game has an inherently better take on Nishiki than the other, but I do think it's really interesting to think about the purpose Nishiki serves in either version of the story. Like I said, in Original 1, he's more of an embodiment of the change and the disconnect Kiryu feels with the new world around him, whereas these new scenes in Kiwami kind of say the quiet parts out loud and explore this other side of Nishiki's character, as well as providing a kind of through line for new fans who might have come onto the series through Zero, of which there are many. Just to harp a little more on Kiwami, I really like its version of the final boss fight against Nishiki, now complete with the series' standard dynamic intro, as well as a new arrangement of the final boss theme, which, while personally I think I would have preferred a more authentic recreation of the original track, I still find this new version extremely interesting. Personally, I consider Kiwami's version of this track to be more of a remix of Nishiki's boss theme from Zero, with the upbeat electronic aspects of Zero's track kind of mixed into Kiwami's, having them kind of peek through the more sinister, emotional, orchestral parts of the song. And if you ask me, kind of reframing this moment, representing these flashes Kiryu and Nishiki have throughout the fight of the way things used to be. Just to kind of illustrate this a little more, here's what his boss theme sounds like in Zero. Yeah. And here's what his boss theme sounds like in Kiwami. Further strengthening this connection is the fact that Nishiki in Kiwami's version of the boss fight actually borrows attacks from Yakuza 3's Joji Kazuma, the brother of Nishiki and Kiryu's late adoptive father, Shintaro Kazuma, or Fuma if you're nasty. This just further emphasizes the emotional hold the Kazuma family has over Nishiki, and the looming shadow and influence of Kazuma himself even after his death. And it's little things like that that I think make these games such a prime example of great video game storytelling. Or at least they used to. But we're not getting into that. This is a positive, happy, lighthearted video. We're having a good time here, okay? Anyways, I think a big part of this tragedy in Nishiki's character is the fact that even after his heroic sacrifice at the end of the game, he's still doomed to go down in history as this thug or this villain, the reputation that got him all this power that he thought he wanted. The one person who truly knew him forced to watch as the Nishikiyama family and the legacy of his closest friend erode, falling into obscurity as the years go by. In terms of that legend of long men, the koi did make it to the peak of the waterfall, but was killed before it could become a dragon. And also, I guess a bunch of other lesser fish are kind of gobbling it up and carrying its corpse around everywhere. I don't know, this metaphor's gone on way too long. Moving on. With Nishiki out of the way, it's now time to talk about my boy, the coolest character ever. Now, moving down the timeline about 7 years, in 2012, we finally meet our next koi. But that's going to be a pretty big can of worms to open, so bear with me for a second while I do a bit of setup first. So, Yakuza 5, like a lot of games in the series, has Kiryu kind of dealing with and confronting his status as a legend in the Yakuza world. It really hammers home just how done with all this shit he is. Like, in this game, Kiryu wants nothing more than to just go home and be with his family, his friends, and all the people he loves, but he can't. Haruka, Kiryu's daughter, has been offered a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to become an idol. And with that, all the fame and fortune that would help support the kids at the orphanage they run while they go through school. But there's a catch. Kiryu, being a Yakuza and a former chairman of the Tojo clan at that, cannot be in the picture. If the public were to learn that this cute young pop singer was related to this outwardly violent gang member, her career would be over in the blink of an eye. And so, Kiryu, being the person he is, removes himself from the equation, moving far out west to the town of Nagasugai. Unfortunately for Kiryu, even this far from home, living under a different name and working as a mild-mannered taxi driver, trouble still finds him. And that trouble, as usual, comes in the form of the Tojo clan, who in this game are looking to expand their domain and forge alliances with other clans throughout the country. See, the chairman of the Omi Alliance, the Tojo clan's largest rival faction, is dying, and the suspicion is that as soon as the successor is selected, they will immediately go to war with the Tojo, hence all the alliance making. They want as many people on their sides across Japan as possible. In particular, Kiryu is approached by two low-ranking Tojo clan members for help, Yu Morinaga and one Masato Aizawa. And as is basically tradition at this point, Kiryu gets roped into some seemingly petty squabble, which eventually boils over into something much, much larger. With Kiryu's segment in this 5-protagonist game ending with him single-handedly fighting off 100 Tojo clan grunts, essentially putting an end to any plans the Tojo might have had for Nagasugai. Just another little note about the music, the song playing during this fight is called The Place Where I Used to Be, which really hammers home the point that Kiryu spends this whole story, and especially this fight, just at war with himself, kind of thinking about how much he misses his family, but knows that he can't be there. After all that though, as pretty much always happens, Kiryu learns about something crazy going down in Tokyo, and can't stop himself from going out east and trying to learn the truth behind it all. Now, the next time we see Kiryu is in the 5-part finale of the game. Again, this is all the culmination of like 60 hours worth of the game's story, but I'm trying to keep this more specific to Kiryu's thread throughout this game, so just bear with me, I promise this is all going somewhere. Now, the ultimate villain of the game is Kurosawa, the dying chairman of the Omi Alliance, and as kind of a last fuck you to the world, he's trying to get rid of all of the major, what he calls charismatic Yakuza, at the forefront of both the Tojo clan and his own Omi Alliance. Basically, the way he sees it, people like Kiryu, like Saejima, pretty much everyone you've been playing as throughout the series, are kind of polluting the Yakuza. These are people who've made it to the top of the heap through either natural God-given talent or through some kind of birthright, but either way, his idea is basically that these people are predisposed, sometimes even from birth, to be leaders or to be recognized in this world. You could almost consider them the Yakuza's ruling class. The way Kurosawa sees it, these people haven't had to work to get to where they are. They haven't had to do all the awful, dehumanizing things the average Yakuza has to get by in this world. I've always kind of seen Kurosawa as a manifestation of the real or non-romanticized Yakuza, whereas Kiryu and all them are obviously very heavily romanticized and idealized. Kurosawa hates what Kiryu and his friends represent because they aren't authentic to that life. Like he says, none of you have ever lost a finger, none of you have had to eat literal shit for botching a job. Basically, to sum all that up, I just want you to keep in your head that Kurosawa is very against the idea of these legendary figures in the Yakuza, which, if you remember, is not all that different from the way Kiryu feels about his own status as a kind of living legend in the business at this point, with Kurosawa kind of reflecting those ideas back at him. But enough about Kurosawa's grand ideology, it's not about him. Once he actually loses and just about all the loose ends are tied up, Kurosawa says that he has one last ace in the hole, waiting at the Tojo clan headquarters. And of course, Kiryu is the only man for the job. Once you arrive at the HQ, after walking past quite a few unconscious or maybe dead bodies, Kiryu finally comes face to face with Kurosawa's ace, Masato Aizawa. That's right, the guy from like 60 hours ago. Aizawa reveals that he is in fact Kurosawa's son, something that he himself didn't know until just recently. He also shares that his father's ultimate goal was to get rid of the leadership of both the Tojo clan and Omi alliance, and leave what's left of both factions to Aizawa. But here's the catch. Aizawa doesn't care about all that. What he wants is a fight. Similar to his father, Aizawa sees the current Yakuza world as weak and flawed. Having spent some time as a rank-and-file member on the bottom rung of the Tojo clan, Aizawa has some real problems with the Yakuza world, specifically embodied by Daigo Dojima, the current chairman of the Tojo clan, who he sees as emblematic of an outdated system and everything wrong with the modern Yakuza. To him, Daigo made it to the top of the Tojo clan less through his own merits and more through the pedigree of his family name, and Kiryu, the former chairman of the clan, advocating for him. To Aizawa, Daigo is where he is today because of the Yakuza's reliance on outdated customs and old systems. And the best part about this is that he's kind of totally right. Like I said in the last video, so much of this series is about the kind of push and pull between the old ways and the new, more often than not embodied by Kiryu as this kind of tradition or this safety net that the Tojo clan keeps falling back on whenever things go wrong. And ultimately, the fact that Kiryu does keep jumping in to save the day all the time not only is detrimental to him as a person, but also to the clan, making it so that it can't really grow and move past these old ways. Does that sound familiar at all? Anyways, Aizawa sees this reliance on things like pedigree, charisma, and reputation as folly, with, to him, the only true way to test one's merit being through one's own individual strength. And I think there's something really interesting going on here as well, with Aizawa kind of needing to prove his own value and his own worth through strength, specifically through combat. Aizawa is implied to be an orphan, and not unlike Nishiki or even Kiryu, this has clearly made him question his own self-worth. The way he's now trying to kind of find his own validation is through proving himself to be the strongest. And as he says, there is no better target on that quest than Kiryu. If Aizawa defeats him, that puts him at the apex of their world. He would finally have the validation that he craves, and proof that he truly means something. Despite having all of the power and glory that would come with being chairman of essentially the entire Japanese underworld being handed to him on a silver platter, Aizawa is ready to gamble it all on himself for a shot at the man he sees to be on top. And of course, right before the fight, when he reveals his koi tattoo, is when this all crystallizes even further. Aizawa has almost reached Long Men, with Kiryu being his final obstacle on this path to becoming a dragon. And in that sense, Kiryu is as much Aizawa's final boss as Aizawa is Kiryu's. Now, there's already a lot happening going into this fight, but there's an extra layer here that I also really like. Like I just spent a while talking about, Aizawa wants kind of a revolution or a reconstruction in the Yakuza. He doesn't like the way things are and wants them to change. And of course, you can't rebuild something without first bringing it down. And I think that sentiment is even reflected in Kiryu. Like I said earlier, so much of Kiryu's story in this game is about him being way past done with the Yakuza as an organization. He still very much adheres to his own code of ethics on what he believes a Yakuza or even a person should be on an individual level, but despite that, and despite still seeing himself as a Yakuza, he is sick to death of the Yakuza as an organization, particularly the Tojo clan. And with that in mind, I think you can kind of see this fight as Kiryu taking the gloves off. It's almost an outlet for his anger, both at the Tojo clan and at himself. Like Aizawa says before the fight, it's kind of Kiryu's fault that the Tojo clan is in the state it is. In his heart of hearts, I think Kiryu is after the same thing Aizawa is. He wants or even needs the Tojo clan to change its ways so that he can live the life he dreams of. It's just a matter of who the right person for the job is. And in that light, I think Kiryu is just as invested in this fight and in testing Aizawa's strength as Aizawa is in proving it. And I love that there's no real animosity between the two of them going into this fight. They're both respectful and even friendly towards each other. We get this kind of master and student dynamic between them just through this one fight. For Kiryu, it's less about stopping some scheme or putting this villain in his place. It's imparting knowledge to someone in need of it. There's this really important thread throughout the series of Kiryu getting to know people better as he fights them. That's just the best way he knows how to communicate. That's who he is. And I think that's especially important in this fight, which, if you couldn't tell, I adore. Like I said, this fight is ultimately Kiryu testing Aizawa, trying to see what kind of person he is. And it's Aizawa doing everything he can to prove himself, both to Kiryu and to himself. That idea I brought up earlier of them both kind of wanting to take down or reconstruct the Tojo clan is even echoed in the fight. At the very start, with that dynamic intro and the Tojo clan sigil being right smack dab in the middle of their fists. You can see that both as the clan's fate hanging in the balance of this one fight, and you can see that as representative of both characters' true antagonists at this point in time, the clan itself. Furthermore, throughout this fight, you're zooming through the building, trashing everything in sight, Kiryu and Aizawa breaking the Tojo down as they go, just like they both wanted, at least in a very literal sense. While I do agree with the idea that Kiryu pushing Aizawa from the chairman seat to the front lawn of the place is kind of him metaphorically forcing him out of the clan and further from his dream, I also think that this fight is them kind of taking their anger out on this place that's so emblematic of all the things that are wrong in both their lives. Also, this might go without saying because you've been seeing them on the screen, but the quick-time events in this fight and the cinematics that go with them are next level to anything the studio's done before or since, except maybe Judgment, but just, oh my god, I love these so much. There's such a kinetic feeling to them in this fight because they go on for so long. Your hands are getting tired from spamming the buttons just as Kiryu's getting run down from the fight itself. It's so cool. Another aspect to this fight that I love is this kind of interplay it has with past games in the series. Obviously, the Koi tattoo and all the similarities between Aizawa and Nishiki from Yakuza 1 are a massive part of this fight, but I think even more so, this fight reminds me of Ryuji's from Yakuza 2. It's not just the whole huge buff guy with daddy issues thing, it's also in the music. The guitar riff that opens Aizawa's theme, The Battle for the Dream, is almost identical to the tune from Ryuji's final boss theme. And just for the sake of comparison, here are the opening notes of A Scattered Moment, Ryuji's theme. And this is how that sounds when you speed it up a little bit. And now this is Battle for the Dream. I don't know if that's convincing or compelling at all, but I think it's neat. Whether it's intentional or not, I still think it's really interesting that these two moments that are so far apart in the series are still linked by this same motif. And believe it or not, that isn't even the only thing that connects these two fights. It might be kind of a small thing, but the fight against Ryuji and the fight against Aizawa are the only two in the series to include this all-or-nothing final punch QTE, which basically means there's a quick time event right when you get to the boss's final sliver of health, which if you complete, congrats, you win, but if you fail it, you die! Which to me cements the idea that these two fights are the toughest Kiryu has in the series, which again could just be because Kiryu was grievously injured before both fights, but still, these are the only 2 points in the series where Kiryu's opponent is a dead even match for him. And again, that's something you only get from the video game of it all. That's not a storytelling choice that would be the same, or would even work if it were a movie, or a book, or any medium that's not inherently interactive the way a video game is. It's beautiful stuff right there. But moving on from 2, this fight has arguably the most connective tissue with Yakuza 0, with Kiryu's final confrontation in that game being about him kind of proving the strength of the dragon on his back, and about booting out the old era and ushering in a new one for his own generation. In other words, Kiryu was once exactly where Aizawa is now, trying desperately to prove himself against these older, established powers. I've seen a lot of criticism over the years of people saying Aizawa kind of comes out of nowhere in this final part of the game, and I have to agree. He does come out of nowhere. I remember playing this game for the first time and getting to that scene where Kiryu opens the doors to see Aizawa sitting there and saying, "Who the hell is that?" because I literally forgot he was in the game. But as silly as this might sound, I think that is intentional. So much of Yakuza 5 is caught up in this idea of passing on hopes and dreams and having this deep effect on people who you'll probably never meet, especially in a public figure. For lack of a better word, idols. You can see this through Haruka as an idol herself, duh, or in Shinada and the way he kind of touched Takasugi as a baseball star, or in the other direction the way Daigo inspired Shinada without even knowing it. The list goes on. So to me, Aizawa is just another person in that chain, that dreamline, you could say. Like the koi on his back, Aizawa is someone who's bought into this legend of the Dragon of Dojima, just one of many people who try to better themselves with Kiryu as their North Star. I feel like both inside and outside of the series, Aizawa kind of represents all those people who admire and respect Kiryu and the legend around him. Those people who see Kiryu as an example of what a person could or should be. All those people who are striving to become like a dragon, you could say. And I feel like that whole idea is very easily translated to us as fans. Although Aizawa claims to be alone and very much values that individual strength of his, this whole sentiment and his entire motive are actually extremely universal. We all have that person in our lives who we see as a hero or an idol, someone we look up to and try to emulate, even unconsciously. And I think that's why Aizawa and these koi characters as a whole are so compelling. They're defined by their desire and their strive to become better. And even though Aizawa and especially Nishiki don't take it to the best places, that desire and that hunger they have is innate and universal. And even though, of course, Aizawa doesn't actually end up winning the fight, he still wins in a smaller sense, I think. He proves that, even for just a brief moment, he could stand shoulder to shoulder with this titan, this person he has this strange respect for, Kiryu acknowledging his strength and passion after the fight, even offering him a round 2. No matter how many years it takes, Kiryu will be there when Aizawa is ready to climb this waterfall again. He may not yet be a dragon, but Aizawa has still proven his strength to be undeniable. And in that sense, I think he still has a small victory here and wraps this all up in a nice little bow. As for Kiryu's side of things, I think I see this fight, and especially this game as a whole, as a kind of climax to his story since the beginning of the series. It's Kiryu finally coming to terms with the person he is and his past as a Yakuza, having this kind of reckoning with this legend status he has, and using it as a force for good to better the new generation and prepare them for after he's gone. And would you believe it, they're actually still rehashing that storyline for Kiryu over a decade later and to far lesser effect. But we're not talking about that. This is a positive video, we're having a good time here, okay? Anyways, if you couldn't tell, all that was just to say that I love Aizawa, and I love the way that he builds off of Nishiki both as a character and as an antagonist for Kiryu. In keeping with the themes of the game, you can kind of see Aizawa as carrying on that dream or that koi spirit that Nishiki had, and that drive to become better in whatever form that takes. Not to mention how it relates back to Kiryu and him getting a kind of second chance to help someone with Nishiki's same internal struggle. It's kind of like they're passing that fish-shaped baton between the two of them. And continuing that trend, it's time to talk about our final character for today. The new hotness himself, Ichiban Kasuga. Now, I can already hear you saying, "What are you talking about, stupid? That's not a fish." And you're absolutely right. It's not a fish. That is, in fact, what's called a dragonfish, or the midpoint in the koi's ultimate transformation into a dragon. And I think that one detail alone tells you a lot about Ichiban's character. His story isn't going from one solid defined state to another, or from koi to dragon. He's somewhere in between. Ichi is a work in progress. Like Nishiki and Aizawa, he still has that inferiority complex that's kind of inherent to all the kois, but he's putting those feelings into a more positive place. Where Nishiki and Aizawa kind of chase this external power and validation to fill this inner void they both had, Ichi's growth takes much more of an internal focus. And hey, video game stuff again, you can even get this from that whole personality system from 7, which I think is a holdover from Persona, I don't really know, but it still works. That whole stat tree where you go from, dumbass to genius or coward to hero or whatever it is a really cool and smart encapsulation of Ichi's entire story and motive throughout that game. Ichiban's whole journey in that game is starting to see himself as someone who could be a hero, someone who can embody all those traits that he so respects and admires, traits that he sees in his own father figure / mentor, Masumi Arakawa. And that also puts him in a really interesting conflict with Nishiki and Aizawa, the more villainous Kois. Ichi does have that same kind of jealousy in him, but he still always leads with this love and empathy for the people around him and draws strength from them. Which, again, video game stuff is kind of given to you through that new turn-based combat system. It's not the one man versus an army in the action games, it's you and your friends against the world. Like Aizawa does in 5, Ichiban kind of carries on that spirit of the Koi, but instead puts all of that drive and ambition and even jealousy into a more positive and focused place, and in a way redeeming that Koi spirit as he does so. Now, another aspect to his character that makes Ichi really stand out among the other Kois is his relationship with Kiryu. And honestly, in 7, Ichiban's first game, there's not all that much. Ichi was in prison through basically the entire series up till 7, so he doesn't have that same frame of reference for Kiryu as this legendary dragon of Dojima that, say, Aizawa did, and especially wouldn't know him as that big-shot 4th chairman of the Tojo clan. If anything, Ichi probably heard about Dojima's murder in 95 and then didn't really think about it much after that. Once they do actually meet in 7, Ichi doesn't know who Kiryu is just from name or appearance alone, though he does eventually find out the hard way. Instead, like I said before, Ichi's, dragon in this game is Arakawa, his father figure. But that one important difference opens the way for this new relationship between Ichiban and Kiryu. And while honestly I don't really like Infinite Wealth at all, I still think one of the undeniably great parts of that game is this kind of deepening bond between Ichiban and Kiryu. Although Ichi still really respects Kiryu and recognizes him as someone much stronger or at the very least senior to him, he doesn't have those same expectations or that same baggage the other two Kois have with Kiryu. To him, he's not the Dragon of Dojima or the legendary 4th chairman, he's just a guy. And on Kiryu's end, that's really refreshing. So much of his life and his relationships are kind of governed by this legend status he has in the Yakuza, and it's gotta be a breath of fresh air to have this person that he knows he can trust and rely on, who doesn't see him as or doesn't define him by his past life as a Yakuza. And on another level, Ichiban presents this new opportunity for Kiryu to finally make things right, to finally make peace with that kind of Koi lineage that he's been so intertwined with since the beginning. I think it's a really beautiful idea that these 3 Koi characters are kind of evolutions of one another, and after losing one and clashing with another, Kiryu wants nothing more than to help this new evolution come into his own as a full person, and more specifically without ties to him. Like Kiryu says in 7, he's not my replacement, he's not the new me. Ichiban Kasuga is Ichiban Kasuga. And looking at it all in the big picture like this, I think that's a really beautiful conclusion for them to have come to with this whole Koi storyline throughout the series. What started with 2 very jealous and angry people kind of lashing out at the world and trying to grab onto what external power they felt they lacked, is now being carried on in a way by someone who's the opposite. He's very comfortable and content with who and where he is in his life, instead using that kind of all-consuming ambition the Koi symbolizes to better himself as a person, instead of grasping for what's outside, trying to fill his void that way. If you stretch it a bit, I think you can even see Ichiban as a kind of post-mortem redemption for Nishiki, and a continuation of that rebellious spirit that Aizawa personified. If it wasn't clear after, half an hour of me talking about it, I really love this idea of the Koi in this series. And especially the way all these characters have this cool interplay with one another, each carrying on their own distinct brand of this Koi spirit. And looking at Ichiban in particular, I think this all really ties back into that whole idea of personal growth and change, and acceptance even, that the series has always been kind of hyper-focused on. And sorry, I'm going to do this again because it bears repeating, but that's a concept that I think this new era of the series really needs to sit and think about for a while. Because a lot, or maybe all, of what they've done in the past few years has been quite the opposite. They're paying lip service to that idea of growth and change that's been a part of the series for so long, but seem to lack the courage to actually take those steps into a bold new direction. If you ask me, they've taken steps backwards, if anything. But that's just me being a party pooper. I've already covered all that nonsense in the last video, so I'll just leave it there for now. And I guess if there was something I wanted us to take away from this, if anything, is that these Koi characters are defined by their ambition and their struggle. That struggle to become better. And, you know, in some cases that looks like murder or organized crime or whatever, but also it's an internal thing. The Kois are maybe even more defined by their jealousy and their insecurity, their constant comparison of themselves to others. And what I love about where they land with Ichiban is this idea that maybe who you are, what you are, and where you are in your life, maybe that's okay. Maybe being like a dragon doesn't mean being the greatest or being the apex of whatever world you find yourself in. It's just being who you are, the best version of that you can be, and doing the best you can do in the moment. And sometimes that looks like bringing down a governor or a cult, but sometimes the best you can do is lying in bed depressed. The world is a dark, cruel place, and it can often feel like things are just falling apart at the seams. Life can get worse, it can get better, but either way, it keeps going. And as hokey as this might sound, I think it's important to keep moving, one step at a time. To keep fighting your way up like my boy Aizawa, because one day you'll find yourself at your long men, whatever that might look like to you. And with all that sap and that cheese out of my system, I think that's all I got for today. If it wasn't totally obvious by now, this video kind of just started as me really wanting to talk about Aizawa because he's awesome. And I guess I tried to expand it into something with a little bit more of a so what behind it aside from just, I really like this character. And, you know, I hope it worked. I hope you liked it. Also, if you couldn't tell, I got progressively more and more sick while recording and re-recording this. So I hope that wasn't too distracting. If it was, I'm sorry. So yeah, that's all I got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time if there is one. Bye!